Beginner's Color Prints. Bicycle and Bluebonnets by Morris Stein. I like the sharpness of focus on the tree and bicycle here, and the inclusion of some bluebonnets with their rich contrasting color to the splashes of orange. I believe this image would be improved by cropping in some of the out-of-focus flowers in the foreground and coming in at the top and the left to place more emphasis on the bicycle. Such a crop would ideally not have the line of the fence bisecting the image, but would place the bicycle on the top thirds and left thirds. 10 points. Dark Side Over Zion by Delise Foglia. I enjoy the richness of the foliage in this image, contrasting with the earth tones of the rocks and the good sharp focus. The skies, adding a brooding atmosphere to the scene, are well observed by the photographer. I feel this image has too much emphasis on the foliage in the foreground. I would suggest cropping in somewhat to exclude the dark green branch in the extreme top right, to crop a little on the left, and also to crop out most of the slightly overexposed rock on the foreground. This would add more emphasis to the little tree that sits atop the main outcrop to the right, which I feel would balance the image pleasingly. 10 points. Glorious Morning by Michael Farnham. To me, this is a well-observed moment with the mist rising from the lake and the sun just highlighting the scene in the background. I particularly like the inclusion of the house half hidden in the trees, for my eye to rest on as it explores this image. I recognize that this is a difficult exposure to make with the shadowy foreground and the brightness behind. It seems to me that there is rather a lot of grain in the foreground and the background lacks vibrance, which would make this more compelling. I would suggest trying to minimize the grain through Photoshop or Noise Ninja and reprocessing the file to see if some vibrance or saturation would make the fall leaves really stand out. 10 points. Cathedral of Zaragoza by Jim Stump. I find this a richly saturated image with good tones even in the shadows. It appears crisply focused, which adds pleasure to me in exploring the textures. There does appear to me to be a small amount of perspective distortion, probably from the slight tilt upwards of the camera. If there is more in the image file, it might be possible to correct in Photoshop, but if not, too much of the image could be lost in attempting to correct. 11 points. Patina Gears by Ken Murphy. I love the well-saturated colors in this image and the arrangement of elements to focus my attention on the mesh of gears. I find this image slightly fuzzy. This would be an outstanding image to me if it were just a bit sharper. 11 points. Clearing on a Winter's Day by Michael Rivera. This image is pleasing to me. I like the clarity, the stark contrast of the black branches against the blue sky. This image has a lot of detail in it, and my eye is searching for the main focal point to rest on. I would suggest another time to try to simplify the composition. 12 points. Stagecoach Ride Through the Stockyards by Julie Horak. To me, the point of focus is all on the horses, with good capture by the photographer of their steps in unison and their lovely faces. The flags and the rider are well presented, and the crop allows me to see the action without too much distraction from the background. I would just like to see if some darkening of the background behind the top silvery knobs on the horses' harnesses could bring out those knobs a bit more clearly. I would have liked to see just a little more of the carriage on the right, but I recognize it may not be available in the original. 12 points. And honorable mention. Goats on Quandary Peak by Chris Kobos. I really love the sharp focus on the foremost goat and the way the photographer has captured the hooves in mid-air and the catchlight in the goat's eye. I also enjoy seeing the young goat following eagerly behind. The rocks fall off in focus behind the goats pleasingly to me. As I look at this image, my eye is a bit distracted by the large amount of clouds and skies. I would suggest, as an alternative composition, consider cropping the sky out, which will require a small amount of cloning of rocks in the top right-hand corner to exclude the sky completely, and see if that would help keep the viewer's attention on the goats. If so, that would require a certain amount of brightening of the goat's fur. 12 points and 3rd place. The Wall by Jackie Carver. I find this image to be an interesting depiction of the contrast between the clouds and the wall, with the elements in good harmony with each other. I feel this image deserves to be shown with some more contrast and vibrance. The image reminds me of Andreas Gursky's Rhine 2 photograph. It sold for $4.3 million not long ago, so keep on with your photography. 13 points and second place. 20s Sophistication by Penny Clark. A delightful portrait with great catchlights in the eyes and posing of the hands, which add to the 1920s ambiance. I particularly like the angling of the model on the diagonal, with lots of contrasting textures for my eye to explore, from the jewelry to the fur background. 15 points and first place. Advanced Color Prints. Flying Through the Air by Susan Stageman. To me, this is a colorful and well-observed moment. I like the smile on the lady's face and her outstretched arms. I also like the arrangement of elements of the ride they are experiencing and the sharp focus in a shot which must have been made in a mere fraction of time. It may not have been possible, but I would have liked to see the feet of the lady and the child to emphasize how they are flying through the air. 10 points. On Golden Pond by Susan Burciaga. I love the simple subject matter here, with the amazing gold and blue lights on the water. My eye enjoys exploring the blurry reflected shapes in the water as well as the vegetation that causes them. I'm not sure if this image is as sharp as it could be. 11 points. Blue Angel Salute by Steve Havacek. I love how the photographer has captured the contrails skimming the intersection of the flag and the pole, and the angles of the planes echoes the line of the lower part of the flag. I admire the punchy exposure and the good color saturation here, and just a hint of movement by the planes to show how fast they are going. This is such a tight crop that I wonder if just a small amount of space on each side would have given each element in this image room to breathe. 12 points. Indian Peasant Lady by John Fowler. To me, this is a pleasing image of this Indian lady with her intense and interested stare at the viewer. Her eyes and mouth show no fear of the photographer, and her expression conveys something of her character to me. The only improvement I can think about here is to darken the white thing behind the lady's head on her left. I find this a bit distracting. 12 points. That Look by Aaron Curry. I like the placement of the subject on the diagonal, which to me emphasizes the look on this young lady's face. I'm pleased to see that her nose does not intersect her cheek, and I can see both eyes clearly. I like the soft light on the subject, and the hairstyle supports the look also. I might want to see if catchlights added to her eyes would add more punch to the image by emphasizing the impish air she has about her. 12 points. Glassblower's Assistant by Gary Coles. I love the way the photographer has captured the moment the glassblower snips off the molten glass, and the perfect exposure for the white hot glass. I like the sharp focus on the glove also, and the hint of the furnace behind him. I would have liked to see a bit more detail in the man's face if it were possible to lighten it somewhat, so that his arm's not so bright when the face is in shadow. 13 points. Sunshine on a Stem by Jay Hoppenstein. I really like the way the photographer has given this image such a feeling of sunshine and warmth. I find the detail in the flowers to be beautifully sharp and well exposed. I do not find anything intrinsically wrong with the image. It just has a lot of flower heads in it, which makes it hard for my eye to rest on the main focal point. 14 points. Grace by Richard Stern. This image to me has a lot of drama to it. The way everything is in soft focus except the inner part of the flower, which is wonderfully sharp and well exposed. I'm pleased by the rest of the image that provides such a lovely sense of space and distance, and to my eye balances so well with the amount of space taken up by the flower. 14 points and honorable mention. It Ain't Mozart by Bob Krause. The treatment of this image strikes me as entirely suitable for the subject, with its bold use of color and the marvelous backlight in the players. My eye enjoys the inclusion of some of the equipment and the gesture of the two players at the microphones. This is a scene that clearly cannot be changed by the photographer, but as an image I do not see what contribution the man with his back to the camera has on the right in the background can make to this image. I would try darkening him down a bit to make his white shirt less obvious. 14 points in third place. Faith by Rachel Cook. I consider this an emotion-filled portrait. Her penetrating stare, the way her hair falls on her shoulders, and the set of her mouth convey so much to me, the viewer. I particularly like how the photographer has caused the background to fade off into the distance, and the angle of the building pushes the subject forward to claim my attention. I also like the choice of clothing, and the white chair and the window frame, and the contrast of the blue of the walls with the fair hair and peach-colored tank top she's wearing. 14 points and second place. Swords Drawn by Tina Arms. The photographer here has captured for me a peak moment of action, coupled with great expressions on the faces of the participants. I also enjoy how the photographer has put the combatants into sharp focus while the onlookers are in soft focus to distance them from the action. 15 points in first place. Masters Color Prints. Clown by Suzanne Graham. I like that the clown in this image is looking thoughtfully off camera, and the arrangement of the props. I appreciate the catchlights in his eyes and the soft shadows behind him. My eye is a little troubled by the difference in colors between the purple in the hat together with the bluish pink in the fabric behind, but the red of the suspenders and makeup, the riot of color, close but not complementary, disturbs my attention from contemplating the clown and his expression. 11 points. Haceta Head, Oregon by Betty Johnson. I find this to be a well-constructed image with a pleasing exposure. I particularly like the way the photographer has captured the full swirl of the waves as they break onto the shore, not a moment too soon. I also enjoy the surf breaking on the headland and the detail in the distant sea and sky. It would make a delightful note card or postcard image, or a large print for a cottage. This image faithfully records the view, but does not give me a photographer's interpretation of the location. I would love to see if the photographer shot this view at a different time of day or with different shutter speeds. 12 points. Life Imitates Art, Carmen Square, Camagüey, Cuba, by Janie Rumberger. I admire the effort that has gone into the construction of this image, the positioning of the real man to mirror the pose of the sculpture, and the clever use of the Adelante newspaper. I also like the light on the man's face, even though the light source is coming almost from behind him. I am slightly disturbed by the inclusion of the blue in the top left-hand corner, which suggests the image is not completely vertical. 12 points. Barn and Bluebonnets by Gary Kelly. I find this a delightful image, with beautiful capture of contrast between the red barn and sky and the distant perspective of the landscape. I consider this an iconic Texas scene. I would like to see a little closer attention to the dodging of the flue vent in the barn roof, which spills over onto the roof, and small reworking of the dodging on the horizon line and the trees that merge with the sky. I recognize that this is a time-consuming work, but I think the image deserves the effort. 13 points. Breakout by Kay Hargis. I am pleased by the wonderful detail in this image, especially around the place where the faucet protrudes through the metal. I admire the sharp focus and cool color tones in this image. 13 points. Circular Firing Squad by Wayland Threadgill. My eye enjoys the balance of colors in this image and the attention given to detail. I appreciate that the photographer has included just enough of the writing on two of the pencils, but not enough to distract my eye with the writing. I also am pleased to see the image slightly off-center. 13 points. Cuban Cigar Lady by Harry Romberger. I like the amazing detail in the lady's skin, and the lack of catchlights in her eyes give her a soulful look which to me matches this subject. I also like the contrast of the greenery in the background to the warm tones of her skin and clothing. I would like to see the dark gray-black object removed from behind her right cheek, perhaps cloned green from the green object behind her right shoulder. 13 points. McBride Music and Pawn by Steve Reeves. To me, this is a rich image with lovely bokeh on the lights in the distance and a lovely choice of exposure for an evocative mood. I particularly like the richness of color and the vintage of the foreground car. I would only say that I prefer the full image underneath the matte, which allows me to see the wing mirror to the right and just a little more of the car on the extreme left, and gives me more information on the top of the lit sign. 13 points. Tailstream of a Waterfall by Bob Johnson. I admire the way the photographer leads my eye through this image and gives me stunning detail in the rocks and vegetation. I also like the choice of shutter speed to blur the water somewhat, but not so far as to turn it into cotton wool. 13 points. Morning Fog Lifting by Frank Richards. I consider this to be a magical image with fabulous light streaming in from the left, but I also very much enjoy the sharp detail of the vegetation in the foreground. I like the small areas of reflections in the water while the rest of the water is smooth. 14 points and honorable mention. Field of Bluebonnets by Dan Meredith. I find this image beautifully sharp front to back, giving me an iconic Texas image. I particularly enjoy the grouping of trees and lake for my eye to explore before moving on to the warmth of the sun and the clouds. 14 points and third place. Sema Joshua Trees by Dennis Fritchie. I am captivated by the gorgeous light in this image and the details in the sky and the vegetation. I also admire the placing of the foreground tree to give it importance. The only thing that mars this image to my eye is the lower branch of the foremost tree that merges with the trees further back to the left. I realize that the photographer could not have physically removed this limb, but I wonder if another tree in this forest might have had cleaner lines to it. 14 points and second place. Home for Christmas by Houston Brown. In my view, this image is an exquisite interpretation of the title. I admire the positioning of all the elements, the perfect posing of the subjects walking happily towards me, the viewer. I just love the light from the locomotive and the steam around it, and of course the snow. The addition of the red light matching the little girl's hat and the ribbons on the boxes is a wonderful seasonal touch, and to my eye adds just the right touch to lift the tones in this image. 15 points and first place.